time once again for Community Forum, and we are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Ari Kohn and Shoshana Wineburg. Ari Kohn is founder and president, and Shoshana Wineburg is in the field placement program, both at the Post-Prison Education Program. Ari and Shoshana, thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning.
Thank you.
So let's begin with, tell us, for those that are not familiar, what is the Post-Prison Education Program?
We're a nonprofit that helps men and women coming out of prison get into college, sometimes both tech schools, community college, and sometimes universities. And over the last 10 years, that's led to almost nobody recidivating. So almost nobody returning to prison that we work with, versus the Department of Corrections having a 51% readmission rate as of last April, which I refer to pretty commonly as a failure rate.
And in fact, nationally, it's even higher, like 60%.
Well, the Department of Justice measures recidivism differently than the state of Washington does. I think they measure it honestly. The state of Washington measures it in a way that lets them sort of hide the true facts, but the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice recidivism rate is close to 70%.
All right. And it's an organization you founded back in 2005?
August 23rd, 2005.
And still going strong. Shoshana, how did you get involved with the Post-Prison Education Program?
I am a first-year master's student in social work at the University of Washington. And so we are required to work 320 hours during our first year at a field placement. And so I was placed here primarily because I'm interested in education and the overlap of the education system with the criminal justice system.
So it's drilled into us that education is the key for if you want to go anywhere, getting a job and being a part of our culture, our society. Is that, I would imagine that's even more true for those people who are coming out of prison?
Yeah, I mean, as a matter of fact, the Seattle Times did an article a couple of years ago, and I was quoted as talking about this titanium barrier. So like with women, they talk about the glass barrier with women rising to higher positions in corporations. With prisoners and former prisoners, I think this is a really almost impenetrable titanium barrier that disallows them from being successful. And I think the only way to break through that is post-secondary education. I'm absolutely positive, convinced of it.
I also think that in this country we have legally sanctioned discrimination on the private sector and the public sector for people with criminal records, and so education is sometimes the only means of transcending the discrimination that you're going to face. It's going to be a barrier to employment.
Yeah, because my understanding is if you come out and once you are pegged as being a ex-felon, that landing a job is incredibly more challenging than for those people that don't have that stigma.
Absolutely. You have to check a box.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, that's absolutely true, but post-secondary education puts that behind you. It puts it in your rearview mirror. It really does. It's, and we've seen it in every instance. So I don't care if somebody comes out of prison and they want to go into culinary arts, or they want to become an electrical engineer, or they want to become a lawyer, or go into commercial welding or whatever. The 7 months in a VOTEC program, or the 2 years in a community college program, or the 4 years at the University of Washington or WSU, by the time you've completed that, your criminal history really becomes a non-issue. I think the legislature and the Department of Corrections. It's a key flaw in their thinking that they don't see that and they don't realize that. Because if they saw that and they understood it and then acted on that knowledge, then I think our recidivism rate would dramatically be reduced. So if you just get people into the career they want to be in, then they don't go back. And those employment issues of having the prisoners talk about having the big F on it's kind of like the scarlet A letter, but the big F for felon on your forehead when you come out. But it just makes it be a non-issue. I mean, and I don't. Over the years, I've gotten to. I don't like to talk about my personal experience, but the first time I realized how powerful that was I came out of federal prison in 2000. I went straight to the University of Washington. 4 years later, I graduated, and my first job was the Washington State Senate. So I had so that's transformative, and me having been in federal prison for 5 years was a non-issue. It was a non-issue, and then once I had time working at the Senate under my belt and UW behind me, it's not been an issue at all. And I can tell you name by name, story after story. A really cool story is, and I think race plays a factor in this. So a black woman, Kimberly Mays, had so many arrests in Pierce County that when I had the Pierce County Jail print out her arrest record once, it was on a dot matrix printer, and I thought if they charged me for the paper, I'm going to go bankrupt, right? And it just kept pouring out and pouring out and pouring out. Well, she had county time, state time, lost 10 kids to the state of Washington, but at a point she just woke up and she got herself into Tacoma Community College. And then she went from there to Evergreen State College in Tacoma, and she got her 4-year degree. And then she got her master's degree at Evergreen Olympia in public administration. And one of her first jobs was, I got her a job for Adam Klein at the Washington State Senate, where she was much loved. But then one of her first jobs was the King County Superior Court. And she became a really valuable employee. So the fact that she had all these arrests and a really insane life just became a non-issue at a point. And that's the power of education. It's incredibly powerful.
So as your program demonstrates with the very low recidivism rate for those who get education after they get out, then what is the resistance to the state supporting this, state and or federal level supporting this? Because it's my understanding they used to at least partly support this idea of rehabilitation and education.
Well, I don't, we had an experience with the Senate earlier this year with a session that's now coming to an end, hopefully someday, where the re-legalization of post-secondary education funding by the state of Washington was, for the third or fourth time since 2005, up for consideration. And Shoshana and I and several other people from the program, including 2 of our students, testified in a hearing before Mike Padden's committee, Law and Justice Committee in the Senate. And it was incredibly frustrating to the point that Shoshana wrote an op-ed and sent it to the Seattle Times, so she could talk about that maybe better than I could.
I think this is just the continuation of a historical backlash that kind of, in my mind, emerges as a result of the civil rights movement. And you see kind of this turn to law and order, and that begins with the war on drugs with Nixon, and then is beefed up incredibly with millions of dollars by Reagan. And actually, it was President Clinton that outlawed Pell Grants for prisoners while they were in prison. And I believe Washington State followed in 1995, outlawing state-sponsored post-education. And so I think that this is just kind of the way the ideology, a punitive ideology of tough on crime has just really seeped into our cultural pores, and we just can't. We have yet to really be able to move past that.
You know, it's a funny thing. The bill that happened in 1995 was House Bill 2010, and we tried. In 2006, there was a legislative task force to figure out how to reduce recidivism, and I was heavily involved in that. And we, in 2007, started working with legislators to reverse House Bill 2010 and re-legalize funding for post-secondary education. And I ended up at a breakfast in Pritchard, which is the old library on the legislative campus, with my former boss at the legislature, Karen Fraser, who's now chair of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. And I showed her this bill, House Bill 2010 from 1995, and she looked at it, and she was like, "That's horrible. How did that bill ever pass?" And I'm like, "Karen, you voted for it, right?" And every single person in the Washington State Senate, in the Senate and the House, voted for that bill. And so it's just, and it's horrific. It literally ignores all the statistics. It ignores all the facts. It ignores the fact that at least 50%, there's a 50% reduction or more and with people who get 2 years of college under their belts or more, and they just ignore all that, and so people who are still at the legislature who were there in '95 when that bill passed, they think that's a horrific bill, but we haven't been able to reverse it, and even with huge support from the Department of Corrections the last 3 years. Bernie Warner, the Secretary of the DOC, has really strongly supported countering that bill, and it just won't happen. And it's because of I call it legislative cowardice, and you heard me talk about it the other night at the Common Good Cafe. It's what Shoshana just talked about. It's the legislators do not want to be targeted for being soft on crime when they're up for re-election, because they really believe that will cause them to be tossed out of office. So they want to be tough on crime. And if you're supporting funding for post-secondary education for prisoners and former prisoners, then you would be perceived or targeted as being soft on crime. And the people in Olympia, the legislators, they protect their jobs, their little dinky $50,000 a year jobs, as though they were making $500 million a year, and instead of voting their convictions, if so, they might support post-secondary education, but they won't put their vote there. They just get engulfed in legislative cowardice and this fear of not being reelected and fear of being attacked for being soft on crime, and they won't put their vote where their heart is and where their mind tells them they should vote and where the statistics prove they should vote.
And my understanding, even from an economic standpoint, it makes more sense to have people. It costs less to send someone to college than it does to have them in prison.
But the most Shoshana's got a copy of the Seattle Times op-ed that she submitted a week or so ago that has some really amazing numbers in it. But the most we've ever spent on a former prisoner was $17,000, and that was over a 2-year curriculum where we were supporting her and her children while she went through the welding program at Bates Technical College. And if she had been in prison, those 2 years would have cost taxpayers $70-some thousand. The average cost of incarceration right now is around $35,000 per prisoner per year.
Yeah, I mean, I have, according to DOC, it's $33,394 per inmate per year. And so if we have studies that say that 2 years of post-secondary education reduces the rearrest rate to 10%, like, clearly it's more, in terms of dollars, it's a much better investment to invest in people's education rather than to keep policies that essentially enable a revolving door to be kept in constant motion.
You know what I think is remarkable? When I watched the members of the Senate's Law and Justice Committee deal with several bills during this session that's just coming to an end, and I watched their chair, Mike Padden, and I kept thinking about when he's in his legislative district and he's running for re-election, he's trying to convince his constituents that he's fiscally responsible. That's a lie. He is not fiscally responsible. And people who vote the way he votes and act during the legislative sessions the way he acts, they're not fiscally responsible. To be fiscally responsible, you would approve funding for post-secondary education. The numbers are just overwhelmingly strong, and they're national, and there's meta-analysis on top of meta-analysis to document it. So, they're like, because of prejudices and personal beliefs or whatever, who knows, they're really lying to their constituents when they say, I'm a Republican, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm physically responsible. And then Democrats do it too. Everybody across the board does it. They're not fiscally responsible, and when they claim to be, it's a lie. It's straight up a lie.
I mean, I just also think it's just the irony that being quote unquote soft on crime actually increases public safety, because you're equipping people with tools and with skills to, be able to kind of overcome the barriers that we set up for people when they're released from prison. And so if we want to keep our community safer, then we should support these people when they are in prison and then when they get released.
So, Ari, you mentioned that the Department of Corrections was supportive of this as well in Olympia when you were there just recently. And I was very lucky to be able to go with both of you and another 10 other people from the Post-Prison Education Program a few weeks back to Twin Rivers, penitentiary?
Twin Rivers unit of the Monroe Correctional Complex. And
it was evident there, incredible experience. It was evident to me there that the members of the Department of Corrections were supportive of your efforts there as well. I'm wondering if maybe Shoshana or you could talk about some of the things that transpired a few weeks ago. I thought it was incredible, just the outpouring from the prisoners and of people who are former prisoners, telling their stories.
I mean, so we had a man stand up and ask the group of men in the room, how many of you want to succeed? And I have never seen so many hands shoot up so fast in my life. And it was just like, boom. And it was so palpable. And the conviction in those hands was just like incredible. It moved me to tears. And then it was followed by another of, how many of you never want to come back here? And just boom, the hands go up. And you ask people, what do you want to do? What are your plans? What are your dreams when you get out? And we just get so many answers from, baker to welder to graphic designer to youth advocate, chemical dependency counselor, human services, social worker, policymaker. And I think like one of the biggest common threads that we see, and I read it all the time in our personal statements, is this desire to give back and this desire to make a difference and to make an impact. And I think that this is another kind of like paradigm shift in terms of, we think of criminals as quote unquote dangerous. And the thread that I see that that's the most common is this like sense of this feeling compelled by this like altruistic motivation and desire to give back, to serve.
I was something you said, Mike, reminded me of several years ago. We were the background I understood was that Ross Hunter, who was sort of the chief money person for the House of Representatives, had asked Jeannie Darnielle, who's now in the Senate, but back then was in the House, to find $15 million in savings from the Department of Corrections budget. And the way I understood that how that played out was Jeannie felt like Roger Goodman, who's in the House and chair of the Public Safety Committee, knew more about DOC operations than she did, so she involved Roger, and then Roger called me. And Eldon Vale, who for many years was Deputy Secretary of the Prisons Division of DOC and then became Secretary of the DOC, had retired, and I had a proposal from Eldon on how to save way more than $15 million in the DOC's budget. So I called Eldon and I asked him if he would sort of come out of retirement for a day or two and come over to the legislature, and he did. And we ended up in JLOB, the John L. O'Brien conference office building, the House of Representatives office building, in a small conference room, private meeting with Jeannie Darnielle and Roger Goodman and Eldon Vale and I. And Eldon went through this proposal that he had given me a year or so earlier, and we went through it and reviewed it in detail. And at the end, and it clearly, Eldon Vale is one of the smartest, most savvy people in the nation, not just in Washington State, when it comes to corrections. And at the end, it was clear that what he had proposed would have saved a bucket of money, millions and millions of dollars. And Jeannie Darnielle, towards the end of the meeting, just looked at Roger and Eldon and I and said, "The political will is not there." Verbatim, the political will is not there. And that's the pervasive problem. It's just they don't have the right now we're going through a $45,000 research effort where UW professors are again evaluating the effectiveness of the program. We did that in 2009, and it was reported to the legislature on January 15th of 2010 in a Senate hearing. And at the end of the hearing, Jim Hargrove, who back then was chair of Human Services, said, this looks promising, right? Well, we had nobody recidivate. We had dealt with 282 people over 4 years, and we had nobody recidivate as of that report by the UW researchers to the Senate. And Hargrove said, it looks promising, right? And I thought to myself, I can't say on the air actually what I thought to myself, but I was like, promising my baloney. It's and now we're 1,308 subjects in 9 years work down the road, and the researchers are documenting that we've had 7 people recidivate. So we're running at a better than 95% effective rate. And even with that ammunition, the political will is not there. The legislature. People tend to, and maybe especially in my field, people tend to blame the Department of Corrections. The fault lies with the Washington State legislature not having the courage to fund fiscally responsible programs that would give us community safety and reduce budget costs. And then a maybe bigger issue is mainstream media. I've gotten where I don't even call the Seattle Times anymore. To me, it's like Blethen Incorporated or something. And they just let a former prisoner or a prisoner or somebody commit a criminal act in the community, they've got no problem with front page one, above the fold, Section A headlines. But let somebody like Gina McConnell, a student of ours, Joey Jensen, a student of ours, Chris Jones, just Shelley Clear, on and on and on, spectacularly turn their lives around, and you couldn't get Blethen at all incorporated to cover that widely if you held a gun to their head. It's huge problems with mainstream media misleading and telling half-truths to the public, and then mega problems at the legislature with those people down there just not having the courage to be fiscally responsible. It's outrageous.
I mean, Ari's not going to agree with me on what I'm going to say. Ari's a little disillusioned, but I'm hopeful that I think that there's a lot of awareness. There's increased awareness around mass incarceration in America, and I do feel like there's starting to be a little bit of a tide shift. And the fact that Hillary Clinton spoke out about criminal justice reform, and and increasingly what we're seeing with police brutality and just the militarization of police, and then these prison numbers and the disproportionate amount of people of color in our criminal justice system. I do feel like there's more awareness, and I am hopeful that, these policies are going to change. Whether or not people ideologically support them, or they just simply run out of money on their budgets and they have to start, they can't afford to keep people in prison, especially as this population ages and they're responsible for their health needs.
Just a few minutes left. One of the amazing things of the visit from a few weeks ago was one of the people that went with us was the president of the University of Washington. And there was a gentleman in the audience who had said to her after she'd been speaking that there were some open seats that all the prisoners had filled. There was about 50 there. Maybe it could accommodate 75. And he said, well, one of the reasons the room isn't packed is because we all got this flyer that said the president of the University of Washington is coming to talk to us and speak to us. And he had said, and my reaction was just like everybody else's. Oh, yeah, right. Like the president of the University of Washington would give a flying whatever about us.
Yeah.
That was amazing to hear her speak and to see that.
Well, what was amazing was to have Anna Marie Kause, who's incredibly busy. I mean, her calendar, I don't think Obama has a calendar with as many problems as she has, and he may not have as many responsibilities as she has. She's got a $4 billion budget, and I don't know how, when I was at UW, there's 40,000 students. I don't know how many there are now, but for her to take a half a day out of her calendar and go to prison with us was just extraordinary. And then she came out on her Facebook page later that day saying where she had been, and just, she didn't advocate for it. She just made a flat statement. We need to support post-secondary education for prisoners and former prisoners. It was courageous, and it was spectacular. And the men in the prison just were blown away the fact that she had taken the time to come up there. It was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm moved to tears every time we do our prison visits, because I feel like there's just this really visceral emotion that comes out. And when she finished speaking, everyone stood up and gave her a standing ovation, and the gratitude in the room was just, again, it was just like you felt it on a visceral level of so much profound gratitude and appreciation that she was there, and she spoke with such integrity about wanting to support their education and their dreams and their hopes.
We're going to be at the women's prison all day June 30th, and I'm trying to find a way to get handcuffs on her to take her with us down to the Washington Correction Center for Women, and we might have a chance of getting her down there also. So it's pretty cool.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. We're talking with Ari Kohn and Shoshana Wineburg, both with the Post-Prison Education Program. And how can people find out more, connect to your organization?
Our website is www.postprisonedu.org, or you can just Google Post-Prison Education Program. Post-Prison is hyphenated. We're in the Central Building downtown. Come visit us, 810 3rd Avenue, Suite 180. We're on the mezzanine. We have a fairly decent Facebook profile or presence, and that's just in Facebook. Just search Post-Prison Education Program. Our office number is 206-524-3333. Give us a call. My email is on our website. I've got 7,000 in my inbox, but I'll respond.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us today.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.